All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of ER Stephen Terizin for dedicating all the Shir Midrashos this month in honor of their newest grandson, Matan Shmuel Aaron. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, he will grow to be an incredible Ben Torah ad Neve Esm Shanim Tovos. To thank our Day of Learning sponsor, Mr. Lawrence Softness, in memory of his beloved father, Joseph Softness, Zichron Livracha, and our Daf Yomi sponsor today, Mr. Bennett Goldberg, in creation of the yahrzeit of his mother, Fega Rezel Bas Zelig, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamos have an aliyah and the families in a chama. But with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Mem Zayin 47, and we are picking up on Mem Vav Amud Beis 46b. So we left off yesterday. Am Rabbi Shmuel ben Levi, Hamahalich Baderach. So if you remember again, we left off with the intro into the discussion about the power of Leviya, the power of accompanying someone when they leave your presence. So we're picking up Rabbi Shmuel ben Levi, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 22, about 22 lines up from the bottom. So Rabbi Shmuel ben Levi says as follows: what happens if someone is walking on the road? And both say what we've begun to see is escorting someone is not simply, something nice that we do, but rather, again, in the eyes of Chazal, it was something which guaranteed the safety of the traveler. So there Rabbi Shmuel Levi says, what happens if a person is traveling, ve'eno Leviya, and he doesn't have someone to accompany him? So what should he do? So Yasok B'Torah, person should learn. It's beautiful, because learning, by definition, provides one with a sense of security as well. Shne'emar keleviyas chein heim l'roshecha va'anokim l'gargarosecha. Rabbi Shmuel Levi, Vishil Arba Psios, Shalava Paro di Avram, because of the 4 steps that Paro escorted Avram when he left Mitzrayim, Shne'emar, Vayitzav alav Paro Anoshim, Nishtabed Babanav Arba Meos Shana. Ultimately, again, he was able to enslave Avram's children for 400 years. Shne'emar, va'avdum ve'inu osam arba meos shana. So we'll say there's a lot of discussion exactly why that's a reward. In other words, reward is usually looked at as something positive. Right here, again, Paro's reward for Leviya, for escorting Avram, said he had the ability to go ahead and enslave. Okay, so there's much to say on all of these Gemaras. We'll have to be strategic on what we go a little bit further into. So Moses was right. Rabbi Shmuel. Excuse me. Arba amos ba'ir eno nizak. Rabbi Yehuda saying to Rav, if you accompany your guest for at least 4 amos when they leave the city, eno nizak, such a person ultimately again is not harmed. That's referring ultimately to the traveler. In other words, escorting someone provides them with a sense of protection, and therefore, again, when they travel, they won't be harmed. So the Gemara says, Gemara tells a story. Ravina elave l'Rav Bar Yitzchak. Ravina accompanied Rav Bar Yitzchak Dalet Amos Be'ir for 4 amos. I will say 4 amos, by the way, is relatively short, right? 4 amos is 6 feet. So he accompanied him for a little bit. So ultimately, again, Rava encountered some danger, but he was saved. And the Gemara attributes his salvation to the fact that he was accompanied. Harav leTalmid adibura shalir. That was saying, now here the Brisa gets a bit more specific with how far, what distance do you have to be malav, do you have to escort someone? So a Rebbe for his Talmud, ad ibura shalir, until the extension of the city. We saw this in our Erevin days. To remember again, there is an extension that is added on to every city of 70 2/3 amos. So ultimately, again, when this is talking about a Rebbe escorting his student, Adi Bura Shalir, Chaver leChaver, one Talmud Chacham for another Talmud Chacham, Ad Tchum Shabbos, 2,000 amos, Tchum. So the Gemara says, Talmud l'Rav, ein lo shir. A Talmud escorting his Rebbe, there is no shir. He has to be malav him. The Gemara says, V'kama, so how much? Suppose it's interesting, right? So the Gemara says, there's no shir. And then the Gemara asks, okay, but what's the shir? In other words, there has to be a shir for everything. V'kama, on Rav Sheshes ad parsa, 1 parsa, suppose a parsa is 8,000 amos. 8,000 amos. And that's only true for a Rebbe that's not a person's Rebbe mufak, your primary Rebbe. Aval Rabba mufak, but for your primary Rebbe, Shlosha Parsos, 3 parsos, we'll say, which is an incredible amount of, an incredible distance. Rav Kahana, 11 Bar Ashi, Mipum Nara, Ad Beit Sinisa. Rav Kahana escorted Rav Sim Bar Ashi from Pum Nara until Beit Sinisa. This was a place. So Beit Sinisa de Bavel. Kimatul Hassam, when they came to Beit Sinisa, and I will say, Rashi points out over here, Beit Sinisa, Rashi says, Makom hu ubod de kolim harbe kmosine har barzel. Beit Sinisa was a place of a large collection of palm trees. Palm trees. So he's going to this place. What happened? When they came to Beit Sinisa, Amarle, Vada da Amrisu Hanit Sinisi de Babel, Mishne Adam Harishon Isnu. People say that these palm trees in Babel, in this place in Babel, are from the days of Adam Harishon. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Amarle at Kartan Milsa, you reminded me of something. The Amrav Yossi Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina says, My dichsiv ba'aretz lo avar ba'ish v'lo yashav adam sham. What's the meaning of the pasuk? What's the meaning of the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, where the pasuk says, I'm sorry, I just lost the place. Where it says, the land that no one ever passed through and no one ever settled there. So obviously, if no one ever passed through, how would they settle? Any land that Adam Rishon decreed should be inhabited, ultimately again was inhabited. So it's an interesting idea. Apparently, Adam Rishon decreed. It's water. I don't want anyone to think that I'm in the same boat as everyone else. So something. So Lamaisa, any land that Adam Rishon decreed should be settled, ultimately again was settled. Any land that Adam Rishon didn't decree would be settled or be habitated, wasn't habitated. Rav Mordechai loved Rav Ashi being Hagronya, Bar Beikipi. So Rav Mordechai escorted Rav Ashi from Hagronya up to Beikipi. V'amrilei ad Beidura. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan from Meir. Kol shinam alava umislava kilu shofech damim. Well, it's a very profound statement. Any person who does not escort, or any person who does not allow himself to be escorted, is as if he has spilled blood. Now, let's say we have not gotten into this yet. Exactly, what is this? In other words, we've always, right before you learn this sugya, if somebody were to ask you, should you escort people? Like, well, again, we assume the context we're talking about over here. Someone's at your home, right? They're leaving your home. What should you do? Escort them. If I were to ask you, like, what's the source of that halacha? What would you say? It's just proper midos, good midos. What you clearly see from the Gemara here is there's something much bigger at play, right? In other words, this is not just about midos. This already is something much bigger. So we're going to get into the deeper hashkafa. Let's just finish up this last story. So the Gemara says as follows, and now it even gets a little bit stronger. Any person who doesn't escort someone else, Steve, thank you so much. Thank you. The Ribbon Shalom should bless you with incredible bracha and hatzlacha and mazel. Kol mashalos libecha l'tova me'en v'esem shalom tovos. Oh my gosh, wow. All right. Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam shakol niyeh b'dvaro. Okay. Good. So we'll say here's the story. Because again, had the people of Yericho escorted Elisha, the whole story with the bears would not have occurred. Now, what is this talking about? Shneimar, Vayam Misham Beitel. He went from there to Beitel. V'hu Allah b'derech u'na'arim kitan yatsu min ha'ir. So I'll say, now, interestingly enough, So Elisha is coming to the city of Beitel. And what happens? When he gets to Beitel, he encounters these Na'arim, these young men, and they come out of the city, Vayiskal Subo, Vayomrulo, they begin to curse him, and they say to him, Ale kereach, go away, bald one, go away, bald one. Amrulo, so we'll say, so what's going on over here? Amrulo, they said to him, Shekrachto alinu es hamakom. So we'll say, we're going to see what ended up happening was as follows. these young men, the water in Beitel, the water of Beitel wasn't potable, wasn't drinkable. So as such, these young boys made their parnasa by bringing water to the townspeople. Well, Elisha went ahead and cured the water. He cured the water. So they got very upset at him because they said to him, you stole our parnasa. So I say, what? And therefore, again, they began to actually curse him and throw stones at him. So my una arim kitan. What does mean arim kitan? I'm Rabbi Lazar. Sheminu arim ben amitzos kitan. They're na'arim, in that literally they were empty of mitzvos. Kitanim sheim kitani amuna. They were called kitanim because they lacked faith. So tana na'arim hayu ubizbizu asmon ki kitanim. They were actually young men, but they behaved immaturely like children. Maskef Rav Yosef. V'dilma Hashem Ekoman. Maybe they were called Na'arim because that was the name of their place. Milo Ksiv does it not say. Ve'aram Yatsu Gedudim V'yeshu Me'eretz Yisrael Na'ara Kitana. The Kashalon we asked on that pasuk, Na'ara Ukitana. What does it mean Na'ara and Kitana? It's two different things. Amar Bidas Kitana Dimin Neurim. What it means is a Kitana from the city of Neurim. So maybe that's what it means over here, that they were from the city of Neurim. Hasam lo mefarish mekoma. Hakam mefarish mekoma. Here's the difference, I will say. There, it does not indicate where they are from. Here, it absolutely does indicate where they are from. Fine. Vayifan achara vayar vaykalim mishim Hashem. So Elisha looked towards them. He turned around. He saw them and he cursed them in the name of Hashem. Ma. What is it that he saw? Amarav Ra'a Mamish. It just literally means that he looked at them. Kedisanya, as you know, Rabbi Shmuel Silber, Komakom Shenasnu Chacham Meinehem, wherever the Chachamim look, in other words, wherever they look with anger and disdain, O Misa O Oni, either death occurs or poverty occurs. Shmuel says, Rosh Shekulin is Arbaman Imam Yomi Kippurim. He saw prophetically that each of them was conceived on the night of Yom Kippur. Now, obviously, marital relations are prohibited on the night of Yom Kippur. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Amar Beluris Ra'abahen Kamoraim. We saw that they had a certain type of avodah zara haircut. The beluris, or what I was, when they would grow out the back of the hair, this was a siman of avodah zara. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Ra'ash Lo Haiseh B'Machlukish Mitzvah. He saw, Elisha looked into them and he saw that they did not possess even a little bit of, even lachluk literally means like moisture. They didn't possess even the littlest trace, the smallest trace of a mitzvah. Maybe again they would have descendants ultimately again who would be righteous. Rabbi Lazar, lo bam v'lo bezaram asov kol hadoros. Not in them, not in their future generation, not in their offspring, for all future generations. So I will say, so what ends up, so now we know the story, right? Elisha comes to the city, he cures the waters. Ultimately, again, these young men who were void of any spirituality, void of any mitzvos, begin to taunt him, begin to curse him. He goes ahead and he looks at them, and death and destruction follows. Let's finish the story. So ultimately, again, two bears came out of the forest and killed 42 of these children. 42, and I remember, it calls them Yeladim, children. They were in fact young men who were acting in an immature fashion like children. So bears come out of the forest, kill 42 of them. I'll say top of Mem Zayin. Rabbi Shmuel, Chad Amar Nes, one said this was a miracle. The Chad Amar Nes Pesoch Nes. The other one said it was a miracle in a miracle. Man Damar Nes, one who says it was a miracle. Ya'ar Hava, there was a forest there already. Dubim Lo Havu, but there were no bears in the forest. Therefore, the miracle is that the bears came. Man Damar Nes Pesoch Nes, the one who says it was a miracle inside of a miracle. Lo Ya'ar Hava, V'lo Dubim Hava. There was no forest, and there were no bears. So ultimately, again, I don't say, why can't you just say there were bears and there wasn't a forest? Why would you have to say the bears part of the miracle? Because also, according to Rashi, what this means is, without the forest, bears wouldn't attack. Apparently, again, the only way bears attack is if they have the ability to run back and hide in the forest. Okay. Amr of Chanina, Bishul Arba'im Ushnaim Karbano Shekriv Balak Melech Moav Hufku Mi Yisrael Arba'im Ushnaim Iladim. In the merit, I will say, of the 42 karbanos that Balak, the king of Moab, offered up, 42 Jewish children were killed. In other words, I will say, reminiscent of what we said before, because of the 4 steps that Paro was Malav Avram Avinu, he was able to enslave Avram's children for 400 years. In the merit of the 42 karbanos that Balak offered up to Hashem, When did Balak offer up 42 karbanos to Hashem? When he hired Bilam to curse the Jewish people. So in the merit of the 42 karbanos, ultimately, again, 42 Jewish children were killed. So the Gemara says, I'll point out, by the way, just how it's interesting, how sometimes the greatest schar for the nations of the world is destruction of the Jewish people, right? That's for some reason, there's a sense of fulfillment that the nations of the world find in that. In other words, give them a better bracha. Give them a bracha that benefits us. Sometimes the animosity and the hatred is so deep-seated and so deep-rooted that there's no greater hana than to see some type of setback for Klal Yisrael. So Gemara says, Ini, is this so? Bam Rabbi Yehuda Marav. This is beautiful. The olam yasok adam Torah v'mitzvos. I feel the shalom l'shma. A person shall learn Torah, do mitzvahs, even not for the sake of heaven. Shemitok shalom l'shma, ba l'shma. Because we'll say sometimes things even done shalom l'shma come to l'shma. How so? Shebeschar arba'im u'shtayim karbanos shehekriv Balak melech Moav. We'll say, get ready for this. Because of the 42 karbanos that Balak, the king of Moab, offered up, zacha v'yatzasa mimenu rus. Wow. I will say, because of the 42 karbanos that Balak offered up. Now remember, why is Balak offering up the carbon? Why is he doing this? He wants to curse Klal Yisrael. That's his goal. So certainly we would call that Shalom Lishma. But in the merit of the karbanos that he offered up, Shalom Lishma, he merited an offspring. Specifically, again, a granddaughter, ultimately, again, like Rus. Sheyatsa mimenu Shlomo. Rus, of course, is the grandmother of Shlomo HaMelech. Well, the great-great-great-grandmother of Shlomo HaMelech, Shekasuv ba elef olos ya'ale Shlomo. And what says Shlomo builds the home in which hundreds of thousands of karbanos are offered. I will say, isn't that incredible? So in the merit of the 42 karbanos that Balak offered up, he is zocha to give birth, to have an offspring of Rus, who is zocha to have offspring like Shlomo, who offers up thousands upon thousands of karbanos. Rus, bito shel Eglon, Bito shel Balak Haisa. Rus was actually a granddaughter of Balak, right? Balak has a son Eglon, and Eglon has a daughter Rus. I will say absolutely incredible. Ta'avaso miul klalahavi. But at the end of the day, again, while that's true, that was a result. But remember, again, Balak's true desire was to curse the Jewish people. That was his true desire. Therefore, again, the truest reward was 42 karbanos. Again, gave him the ability for Klal Yisrael to lose 42 children. It happens to be, again, as a secondary reward, so to speak, he has a granddaughter who gives birth to Shlomo, who ultimately goes ahead and offers up thousands of karbanos. So I will say incredible. And also, by the way, of course, an incredible Shavuos reference right here, just a little bit more than a week away from Yom Tov. Incredible. So the Gemara goes back to Anshe Ira Elisha, Hinena Moshav Ha'ir Tov, Kasher Adonira. So I'll say, so just before we go on, just understand why are we in this story of Elisha. Now we're going to go back to it in just a moment. Why are we in the story of Elisha? Because we'll say Elisha's going from Yericho to Beit El, and the Gemara says, had the people of Yericho escorted Elisha, this entire tragedy with the loss of the 42 boys would have never happened. Right? Because apparently, I guess they would have been there, they would have interceded, Elisha would have been calmed, or they would have prevented the boys from starting with Elisha, and the whole thing wouldn't have started. So at the end of the day, this is another story teaching you about the importance of Leviya, of escorting someone. So we'll say, so now what we've seen, what's come out, before we go on, what's come out over here is this concept of Leviya, of escorting someone, is not simply a nice thing, but it's a clear halachic mandate. Right? And clearly, again, there's this concept that if a person does not escort someone else, there's danger. There's danger involved, and there's culpability on the part of the person who fails to escort their fellow Jew. Right? So we'll say, what's the pshat? What's the power of Leviya? So I just want to share with you very quickly, there is a beautiful idea by the Nesivos Shalom. So the Shalom Rebbe says something so powerful. I want to quote you. He says as follows. He says, the Gemara, and remember again, what did the Gemara say? If you don't escort someone, it's as if you're spilling your blood. And also remember again, the Gemara said in the reverse. If you don't allow yourself to be escorted, you're also responsible for spilling blood. So what's the pshat? So I'll say, he says something incredible. He says, Perish, just want to quote to you, Kizeh koach ha'adam yoser, kasher hu toch klal b'nei adam. shaz yesh lo koach harabim, v'kasher ha'adam hu yechidi hu nifrad, as yesh lo koach shel adam prati. So Rabbi say this is incredible. The power of Leviya, when you escort someone, what you are making a statement is, you are part of the collective. You are part of the group. You are not an individual, but rather, again, you are part of the klal. And I will say, when you are part of the klal, there is a koach, there is a schus, there is a power that you have. Conversely, when you're an individual, all you have are your own merits. Maybe they're enough, and maybe they're not. So I will say, that says, and the Rabbi goes on, he says something so powerful. So therefore, again, when a person is traveling, by definition, they are susceptible to all types of danger. So if at the beginning of that journey, you embed that person in the context, in the rubric of the klal, then that person is not traveling alone. That person is part of the collective. That person is part of Klal Yisrael. That person has the Shmira Yisir of what it means to be part of the Klal. And that's why the obligation to seek out Leviya, the obligation to seek out accompaniment is both on, we'll call it the host and the guest. Don't travel alone. Don't travel alone. Because we'll say at no point in life should a Yid ever be alone. A Jew always has to embed himself in the framework of the klal. So you're taking leave of your host, walk with the host. Again, because in that moment, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm not traveling as an individual, I'm part of the klal. That's what we'll say, what does the Gemara say? What happens if there's no one to escort you? What happens? What should you do? What should you do? And what did the Gemara say? Yasok b'Torah. Because I will say, what is the other way in which we embed ourselves in part of the fabric of Klal Yisrael? Torah. And I will say, what a new dimension as to what it is that we do. I will say, especially as we lead up to Shavuos, where we celebrate Kabbalah Torah, I will say, what is the power of Torah? So, of course, the power of Torah is, it teaches us how to live. Right? Without Torah, I don't know what to do. So Torah teaches me how to live. What else is Torah? The power of Torah is a window into the divine. After all, again, the Medrash calls the Torah the daughter of the Ribono Shalom. Torah allows me to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But there's another dimension of Torah. Torah allows me to connect with Klal Yisrael. Torah is our glue. Torah is what holds us. I say, this is an incredibly important idea. What is the glue of Klal Yisrael? It's Torah. It's the only glue. It's the only glue. There's nothing. There are other things that could help bind us together. But the only thing that is the true eternal glue of Klal Yisrael, right? That's Torah. And that's what the Gemara says. What happens if there's no one to escort you, no one to accompany you? Ultimately, Yasok b'Torah. Learn, and that learning ultimately, again, will embed you in the framework of your people. Or as I will say, the highlight of the concept that the Gemara is highlighting is a Jew should never be alone. The moment you're on your own, I will say, is the moment you open yourself up to all types of difficulties and dangers. Embed yourself in the klal, part of something bigger than yourself, and you could tap into the collective merit of your people. Incredible. Let's finish the story. So the Gemara goes back to the Gemara says, "Vayomru anshe ha'ir Elisha, hinei na Moshe va'ir tov, kasher Adonai ra'eh." So I'll say it's actually a very interesting pasuk. So the pasuk says, the people of the city said to Elisha, the city is a good place. So the lashon of the pasuk is, they said to Elisha, "Vayomru anshe ha'ir Elisha, hinei na Moshe va'ir tov, kasher Adonai ra'eh, v'mayim ro'eh v'aretz mishakeles." What is this? This is incredible. The people say to Elisha, this place, right? This place is a great place to live, even though you can't drink the water and nothing grows in the land, right? But otherwise, this is a fantastic place to live. So the Gemara says, "V'chini achar d'mayim ro'im v'aretz mishakeles." I understand. If you can't drink the water and you can't grow anything in the land, elamat tovasa. What's good about the city? So the Gemara says, Amr Rabbi Chanin, bro, says incredible. Amr Rabbi Chanin, chen makom al yoshvav. Rabbi say, people find favor in the place where they live, even though what? Even though it's not ideal, right? There's a certain chen. There's a certain. I remember. So a couple of years ago, my wife and I had the great zchus really to visit the community in South Africa, in Johannesburg, South Africa, and an incredible community, beautiful community. they happen to have very high crime there. So people really, like, houses are built behind walls. So I was in my life, I said, like, I could really see myself like living in a community like this. It's so beautiful and it's such an achdus and it's so incredible. I said, yeah, but there's so much crime. They live behind walls. I'm like, so much crime. We live in Baltimore, right? We live in Baltimore, right? So we have cameras and alarm systems. Okay, so they have walls. It's so fascinating. It's so fascinating how, again, people, right, where you live has a chen, right? Where you live has a certain favor. You get used to where you live, even though it's clear at the end of the day that there are so many problems with it. But Lamaisa, there's a certain chen, there's a certain favor you find in the place where you set up shop. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi says incredible Gemara. Shlosha chinosein. There are three things for which the individual finds chen that others may not find chen. So chen makam yoshvav. There's a certain chen, there's a certain favor where you live, right? Literally, again, so the city in which people live finds favor in their eyes. Chen isha al baila. What's this incredible? A husband may find his wife attractive, even though others may not. In other words, a woman may not be objectively beautiful, but ultimately, again, a husband, right? She finds favor in her husband's eyes. And chen mekach al mikcho. When you purchase something, there's a certain chen, right? There's ultimately, again, a certain favor that item finds, as well say. So there's a concept brought down, I saw it two places. Ben Yoyad and Marsha both say the same thing. I will say, what's the common denominator over here? That without this chen, people would never be happy with anything in life. I will say, think about this. So this is the place where you live, the person you're married to, and the things you possess. There's a certain siyat HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us to find happiness where we live, even if at the end of the day, it's not such a great place. HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us to find chen in the person we're married to. And by the way, the Gemara phrases this as a man to a woman, but it's for a woman to a man as well. HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us to find a certain chen in the person we're married to, even if the person may not be objectively handsome or beautiful. And the HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us to, so why? Right? At first, we allows us chen in the objects we possess. Because without this chen, I will say, we would never be happy. We would never be happy, right? We'd always lack a sense of contentment. With this chen, we're able to be content, find contentment with what we have in order to be able to build productive lives. It's such an incredible idea. Tana Abanan. I just want to point out there's so much more to say on each of these Gemaras, but okay. Tana Abanan. Shlosha chalon chala Elisha. Elisha became sick 3 times in his life. Echad shegira dub metinokos. One time I will say because he was held accountable because of the bear episode. I will say this is the bear episode. The bears killed 42 boys. So Elisha was held accountable for that. One because he pushed away Gehazi with 2 hands. We're going to talk about that. Gehazi was his attendant. So we'll say like his shamus, his student. So we'll talk about that story in just a moment. And then the third illness was the illness he died from. So he says Elisha died because of the illness. Good. So let's listen to this. So we'll say 3 times he became sick. Twice. Because again, he did something wrong, right? Because the episode with the boys, the episode with Gehazi, 3rd time he became sick, that's the illness he died from. Well, see, here we go. What's the story of Gehazi? So the Gemara says, Tana Banan, the Olam Tehei is incredible. The Olam Tehei, small dochav yom mikameras. Well, see, this is a profound Gemara. In general, when you push someone away, you should push away with the left hand and bring close with the right hand. I will say, what does that mean? That sometimes in life you have to rebuke someone. Right? So when you rebuke, that's called pushing away. When you rebuke with the left hand, where again, it's considered to be the weaker hand. Rebuke with the left hand, but while rebuking, pull the person close as well with the right hand. So push away a little bit, but pull closer even more. So the Gemara says, Lo ke Elisha, shedachvu Gehazi b'shtei yadav. Don't be like Elisha, who pushed away Gehazi with 2 hands, or ki Yoshua ben Prachya, shedachvu le'echad mitamidav b'shtei yadav. Or like Yoshua ben Prachya, who pushed away his Talmud with 2 hands. We're going to talk about both of these stories. We'll say first of the widest lines. Here we go. Elisha Mahi. We'll say, what's the story with Elisha? Dichsev, Vayomer Naaman, Hoil, Kach Kikarim Uksiv. Vayomer Elav, Lo Libi Halach, Kasher Hafach Ish Me'almer Kafto, Likrasecha. Ha'es lakachas es hakesef, v'lakachas begadim v'zeisim ukramim mitzon. So we'll say, so listen to this. Problem? Okay. So the Gemara says as follows. So we'll say, this is a really incredible Gemara. So we'll say, so now listen to this. So the Gemara says as follows. So just to give you the background of the story. So there was a Naaman who was a general of Aram, was afflicted with tsaras. He came to Elisha to heal him. And what occurred? So Elisha healed him. So Naaman offered to pay him a lot of money, but Elisha refused. Elisha refused the money. So says, so what occurred? So afterwards, Gehazi, Elisha's attendant, saw an opportunity here to get rich quick. He ran after Naaman. He said, "Oh, my master reconsidered, and he'd like the money. He'd like the money." See, he didn't ask for a lot, right? But Naaman ends up giving him a lot. He gives him 2 kikarim of silver. Uksiva yomrei love. So we'll say, so afterwards, so Gehazi thinks that he's going to hide this from Elisha. Of course, you can't hide anything from Elisha. So I'll say second, why live love lo libi halacha sharafach ishmael merkavto the grascha ha'es lakachas ha'sekesva lakachas begadim mizesim kramim v'tzon bakar v'avadim u'shvachos. So let's say so Elisha confronts Gehazi and he says, do you not think, essentially, don't you know that I know what happened? That you took money, you took clothing and olive trees and vineyards and sheep and all this stuff. So first of all, the Gemara says, first of all, Gehazi didn't take all that. I will say Gehazi took some silver and some clothing. That was it. So the Gemara says, Kasef u'begadim hu d'shagol. He took silver and clothing. Amr Yitzchak ba'osa shah haya Elisha osek b'shmona shratzim. We'll say this is incredible. In that moment, Elisha was learning the sugi of shmona shratzim. Amr lo Rasha higia eis litos char shmona shratzim v'tzaraas naaman tidbak becha u'bezarecha li'olam. So I will say, so what he was telling to Gehazi was, it's not just that you lied and you manipulated the situation and you for personal gain, but rather what you also did is you missed out on the opportunity to learn. I will say, so that's what he was rebuking Gehazi, and this is really an incredible yesod in general. I will say, sin, when we sin, which inevitably we do, but there's compounded loss. Compound loss is every single time I commit an avera. Number one, there's the avera I'm committing, and at the same time in which I'm committing the avera, I could have used that same time and that same energy to do something good. That's the compound loss of chait. Number one is the actual commission of the sin, and number two is in the time and with the energy with which I was sinning, I could have been doing something profoundly positive. And that's what Elisha says to Gehazi. Not only did you lie, and not only did you go ahead and manipulate the situation for personal gain, but we were learning, and you missed out on all of that Torah. You missed out on that entire sugi. It's incredible. Therefore, I will say, what was the punishment ultimately again for Gehazi? What was the punishment? The punishment was that the tsaras of Naaman will now cling to you and your descendants. The Gemara says, "Va'arba anashim hayu mitzoraim." So I'll say ultimately again, the pasuk, the Navi talks about four men who were perpetual mitzoraim, lepers, who lived outside of Yerushalayim. Am Rabbi Yochanan zu Gehazi u'shloshes banav. These were Gehazi and his three sons. Vayelech Elisha Damasek. So I'll say Elisha went to Damasek. Lama halach. Why did he go? Am Rabbi Yochanan shalach lahachzir leGehazi b'tshuva. I will say at a certain point, Elisha realized that he dealt too harshly with Gehazi. He dealt too harshly with him, and therefore again, he went to go ahead and bring Gehazi back into the fold. So the Gemara said, V'lo chazar, but Gehazi would not return. Amar lo chazar b'cha. So Elisha says to Gehazi, do tshuva, come back with me. Amar lo kach mikublani mimcha. He says, Rabbi, I learned from you. Kol mi shechata v'hechti es harabim ein maspikin biyado lasos tshuva. We learned that whoever sins and causes the public to sin cannot do tshuva. So Gehazi was saying, I'm too far gone, because not only have I sinned, but I've caused others to sin. So the Gemara says, my avad. So what did Gehazi do that he caused others to sin? Ikada Amri Evan Shoeves Talalo Lechatas Yiravam Ve'mido Ben Shamayim La'aretz. Vikada Amri Shem Shamayim Shem Chakak La Puma B'Haisomeres Anochi V'Lo Yelecha. Rabbi say this is incredible. So some say after Gehazi was rejected from Elisha, Rabbi say he went over to the other side. Now remember again, Yeravam ben Nevat was the first king over the split kingdom of Yehuda and Yisrael. Yeravam did not want Jews to be Ola Regel to Yerushalayim. So what did he do? He created 2 golden calves. And he said, there's no need for anyone to go to Yerushalayim, just worship Hashem here. Now, originally, the golden calves were still a form of service of Hashem. Later on, they devolved into a form of Avodah Zarah. So Gehazi decided to help out. What did Gehazi do? So I will say Gehazi installed magnets, a series of magnets inside of the calves, so that the calves would float, levitate. So it looked like, again, that they were flying, lending credence to their image as a deity. Others say Gehazi put the name of Hashem inside the mouth of the calves, and the calves began to speak. Either way, he participated in the creation of communal Avodah Zarah. So he said, Rebbe, I sinned and I caused the public to sin. Ultimately, again, there is no return for me. Others say, Rabbanan hava dacha mikamei d'chsiv, v'yor b'nei hanavim Elisha, hine ne'amakom asher nachnu yoshim sham lefanecha, tsar mimenu, michlal da'ada idna lo hava dachik. So I both say, others say that in general, Gehazi had prevented Talmidim from accessing Elisha. So because he had prevented Talmidim from accessing Elisha, that's Chotei U'Machti Yisrael. So we'll say, this is an incredible story. So you see over here that what ended up happening, so Elisha pushed away Gehazi. Now to be clear, did Gehazi do something wrong? Absolutely. But the response of Elisha was so strong that even when Elisha goes back and tries to go ahead and bring Gehazi back into the fold, what happens? It's too late. It's too late. So you see from here the power of rejection. When people feel rejected, they engage in all types of negative behaviors because figure if I'm going to be a nothing anyway, so I might as well be a good nothing. And I want to point out, the Gemara holds Elisha responsible for rejecting Gehazi in such a strong way. That's how the Gemara says, sometimes you have to push someone away. Push away with the left, but simultaneously bring them close with the right. I will say, what's the story of Shua ben Prachya? So Shua ben Prachya Mahi, we'll say, listen to this. So we'll say, we know the story of Yanai, King Yanai. Ultimately, it was one of the Hashmonai kings. So King Yanai was killing off rabbis. Right? In other words, I will say, so there were kings like Herod did the same thing, right? So King Yanai put out, he didn't like certain rulings of the rabbis. So therefore, again, he was killing out some of the rabbanim. So Shimon ben Shetach at Menil Achse. So we'll say Shimon ben Shetach was hidden by his sister. His sister happened to be the wife of King Yanai. Okay, so he was the king's brother-in-law. So Shimon ben Shetach was hidden by his sister. Yoshua ben Prachya azal arek la'Alexandria shel Mitzrayim. Rabbi Shmuel ben Prachya went and hid in Alexandria. So we'll say, so what happened? So the Gemara says, shel Mitzrayim. So I'm sorry. Arak Alexandria shel Mitzrayim. Ki have a shalma when things calm down. Shalach le Shimon ben Shetach. So was Shimon ben Shetach sent Rabbi Shua ben Prachya the following coded message. Mini Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, from Yerushalayim, the holy city, Lecha Alexandria shel Mitzrayim. I send a message from Yerushalayim, the holy city to Alexandria of Egypt. Achosi Ba'ali Shari B'Sochech. Literally again, my sister, my husband dwells within you. V'ani Yosheves Shomema, and I sit here desolate. Now I will say, essentially the message was from Shimon ben Shetach to Rabbi Yeshua ben Prachya, the city of Yerushalayim is desolate without you, i.e. come back home. It was a message that the coast is clear, you could come home. So the Gemara says, Shema Mina, Havadei Shama. So Yeshua ben Prachya understood the message. He said, there's now peace in Yerushalayim, let me return back. So now we'll say, here's the story. Okay, so just to frame everything, I just want to point out to you, we're going to see something interesting. This story, historically, was not included in many editions of the Shas. Was not included. You're going to see why in just a moment. So we'll say, so now just to understand, so Shua ben Prachya now is on the way back to Yerushalayim from Alexandria of Egypt. Now, B'Pashtus, Yehoshua ben Prachya, he's one of the Gedolei Adar. He's traveling with an entourage. Ki asa ikla lahu shpiza. So on his way, he stops off at a particular inn. Kam kama b'yikra, shapir avdila yikra tuva. So the innkeeper, they treated him with incredible kavod, right? They gave food, incredible display of honor. So Yosef v'kamishtabach, kama no achsan yazu. And Rabbi Shmuel ben Prachya says, see how wonderful this inn is. Amar le echa mitamidav. One of the students said, Rebbe, she's not so beautiful. Einah trutos. Her eyes are a little bit slanted. So here Yoshua ben Prachya is praising the inn. This student thought that Yoshua ben Prachya was talking about the innkeeper, the woman, and saying how beautiful she was. And the student comments back, essentially saying she's not so beautiful. So what happened? So the Gemara says, Amarli Rasha, Bekach ata osek. Rabbi Shimon ben Prachya says to the student, what are you talking about? You think I'm talking about a woman, right? You think publicly here I'm talking about the beauty of a woman who's not my wife? So he says, why? So I will say, it's problematic on two levels. It's problematic that this is what the student thought the Rebbe was talking about, and it's problematic because this is what the student himself was thinking about. So apek arba mea shipuri v'shamte. So we'll say again, literally he took out 400 shofros and he excommunicated him. So Rabbi Shmuel ben Prachya excommunicates this student. Kol yoma asla kamei v'lo kibla. We'll say so the student was profoundly sorry, right? And wanted to do tshuva. And every single day he came to Yoshua ben Prachya. V'lo kible. Rabbi Shmuel ben Prachya would not accept him. He was so incensed at what happened, he would not accept him. Yom achad have kari kriyas shma. So we'll say one day, Yoshua ben Prachya is in the middle of davening shma. Asa lekamei, and the students came to him once again to ask for forgiveness. Have b'daiti lekebel. We'll say that day, Rabbi Shmuel ben Prachya was going to accept the student back into the fold. Ach v'leviya day. So we'll say here's the problem. The student came to the middle of shma. So Rabbi Shmuel ben Prachya was going to accept him. So we'll say what did Rabbi Shmuel ben Prachya do? He motioned to him to come back later because he's in the middle of shma. What happens? Savar matri dochile. But the student assumed that the motion wasn't to come back. Rather, what was the motioning? Go away. Go away. So once again, the student thought that he was rejected. Azal zakaf levinta palcha. And I was saying, I literally translated what does it mean? What did he do? He stood up a brick. He stood up a brick and worshipped it. In other words, the student decided that if I am going to be rejected from Yiddishkeit, then I'm going to go ahead and worship idolatry. Amrle, when Rabbi Shimon ben Prachya finishes, he says to the student, come back, do tshuva. So Amrle, kach mikublani mimcha, Rebbe, I learned from you, kalachoti machti esarabim, that if you sin and you cause others to sin, because at this point in time again, he had done avodah zarah, caused others to do avodah zarah, you cannot go ahead and do tshuva. Damramar kishef v'hises v'hidiach es harabim v'echti es harabim. So we'll say this student, what did he do? He did kishuf, he did sorcery, and when he misled, caused the public, he caused others to sin. So we'll say, so again, before we get to that, we'll say, why is this not included in many editions of the Shas? So I will say, there isn't a Sotah. Actually, there's a whole piece. Rabbi Yamin Lau has a great multi-series called Chachamim, where he goes to a stage to say he has this entire story. And from historical references, he points out that this student was the man who becomes known as Yeshu. Right, that's Jesus. So ultimately, again, the rejected student of Rabbi Shmuel ben Prachya, ultimately again becomes Yeshu Hanotzri. I will say, just like I just want to point out something amazing. Just so you should understand that Yeshu, right? Yeshu, so Christianity comes from a rejected student of Shmuel ben Prachya. Yishmael comes from a rejected son of Avram Avinu. And I will say, I just want to point out, the Ramban by Yishmael says, why is there so much animosity between Yishmael and Yisrael? So you know what the Ramban attributes it to? The Ramban attributes it to the fact that Sarah mistreated Hagar. Because Sarah mistreated Hagar, that's why there's animosity between the children of Ishmael and the children of Avram, right to this very day. And I will say again, what have been the two greatest sources of animosity for Klal Yisrael in this world? The descendants of Yeshu, the descendants of Ishmael. Constant, right? It's one of them is always going. I will say, isn't it incredible? And where does it stem from? Where does it stem from? Stems from rejection. Stems from rejection. I will say, is it not an absolutely overwhelming reality that hatred, that animosity, ultimately stems from their own rejection? And I will say, but another incredible yisod from the Rabbi Shmuel Silber is, I will say, just on a relationship level, sometimes there are fallouts that occur in relationships. I will say, fix them as soon as possible. Because Lamaisa, if you delay in fixing broken relationships, then sometimes even when you're ready to do so, look what happened, right? Yoshua ben Pracha was ready to accept this student back. He was ready to accept it. But what happened? The day in which he was ready to accept it, it was in the middle of Kriyas Shema. If you delay fixing your relationships till some more opportune time, often that opportune time never comes about. If there is a relationship in a state of disrepair, repair it quickly, repair it now. If you wait, sometimes that moment never comes. Because even in that moment when you're ready, there's a whole confluence of events which may prevent that relationship from ever being healed. Such a tragic story. Both I think Gemara ends. Tanur Shimon Elazar Omer Yetzer Tinok V'isha. Rabbi says incredible. When it comes to your Yetzer Hara, Rabbi says specifically the Yetzer Hara for relations. So when it comes to that yetzer, that desire, tinok, dealing with children, isha, dealing with women, te small docha, push away with the left hand, but pull closer with the right. So we'll say, let's analyze each of these. So we'll say the yetzer ultimately, again, we'll say, person has a desire for relations. So we'll say, a person says, no, I'm going to totally vanquish that desire. Can't do that. Because there's a mitzvah Pain of Rejection, right? There's a mitzvah of procreation. Furthermore, again, that desire, if channeled the right way, ultimately, again, is a very powerful tool in building marriage. So as I say, but yet, at the end of the day, if it goes unchecked, it can get a person into all kinds of trouble. So to speak, push it away with the left, but bring it close with the right, which means utilize it in the proper way. And I will say, when dealing with children, I will say, no discipline is a disaster. Right? I will say, and this is one of the greatest things. People think today that they can't discipline their children. If I discipline my child, they're going to go off the derech. If you don't discipline your child, they're going to go off the derech. You have to discipline your children, and you have to discipline in a significant way. But discipline is done with the left hand. And while I discipline, simultaneously, I am building that child with love, with the right. It's the hardest part of chinuch. But if there's no discipline, no rules, disaster. All discipline with the right all the time, disaster. Discipline, firm discipline with the left, while simultaneously infusing that relationship with love from the right. Let's say how we deal in a marriage with a wife. We know, again, let's say that a husband has to be so sensitive with the feelings of his wife. Or maybe there'll be a moment where, again, something significant or something, a husband never disciplines his wife. Can't use that lashon, right? It's not, not even a joke. Like, it's chas v'shalom, that doesn't even enter into the marital lexicon. But Lamaisa, sometimes there's a difficult moment in a marriage where maybe a husband has to say something, right? It happens sometimes in relationships where something has to be said or something has to be done. Even in a marriage where there's a difficult moment, it always has to be done. The difficulty is done with the left, but the overwhelming love always comes about with the right. How to manage our relationships, I will say, with our spouses, with our children, and again, how to manage our relationships with our wants and desires, right? Sometimes the difficult parts have to be done with the left, but always a sense of love with the right. Incredible. We'll say Mishnah, Nimsa, back to Egla Rufa. Nimsa Horeg, Ad Shalom Nerfa, Egla. So we'll say, now again, what happens if they found the murderer? Remember again, we're talking about a person who got murdered and we don't know what happened to the murderer. So we'll say, so what happens if at the end of the day, again, they find the murderer before the Egla was decapitated? So what's the halacha? Okay, so if we find the murderer before we decapitated the calf, so what do you do with the calf? Set it out to pasture. In other words, leave it alone. It's chulin. Mishanerfa egla. What happens if you find the murderer after the calf was decapitated? It's carbon coma. Bury the calf where it is. Shal safek bas mitchila, because remember again, the calf only came out of a whole safek. Okay, mission accomplished. Nerfa egla v'achach nimtzas ha'oreg. Suppose similarly again, if you say what happens if they decapitated the calf and afterwards again they find the murderer. They find the murderer. So remember again, now you might have thought, well, the guy gets off. After all, again, they decapitated the calf. No, harezeh yaharig. Ultimately, again, the person is still sentenced, right? Even though we brought the paraduma, the egla rufa, at the end of the day, the murderer is still put on trial. So one witness says, I saw the guy who killed this person. The other person, other Eid Echad says, you didn't see anything. One woman says, I saw who killed this man. Another woman says that you did not see. What's the halacha? You orphan. They would decapitate. In other words, we'll say because that. Remember again, the witnesses cancel each other out. One witness says, I saw the person who killed this individual, and two say you did not see, how you orphan, because we'll say again, that's 2 against 1. So Shnaim Omrim Ra'inu, 2 say we saw, and 1 says you didn't see, lo you orphan. Ultimately again, they were not to Egla Rufa, because halacha l'mais again, you have 2 witnesses. Mishra will say, incredible end of the Mishnah. Mishra Rabu Ratzchanan, once I will say again, murderers, there were more murderers. In other words, we'll say that it's not just more murderers, but murders were happening in a brazen fashion. Batla Egla Rufa. They stopped doing Egla Rufa. Now we'll say, the reason they stopped doing Egla Rufa is the whole chap with Egla Rufa is you don't know who the murderer was. When there came a time when there was such a proliferation of murders and some well-known high-profile murderers that when they found the dead body, essentially, they effectively knew who did it. So because they knew who did it, there is no din of Egla Arufa. What happens? So the Gemara says, Mishabar Elazar ben Dinoi, V'techina ben Prisha, Hayar Nikra, Chazru Likrosa ben Raska. So we'll say if they gave examples of this. For example, this guy, Eliezer ben Dinoi, who ultimately became known as Tchina ben Prisha, and then they just called him Ben Ratzchan. They just kind of, shortened it to son of the murderer, right? And that's how he was known. So you had people like this who were high-profile murderers. They stopped doing Egla Rufa because when they found the dead body, they knew who did it. Mishraba HaMenafim, well, say similarly again, when adulterers proliferated, Paska Mayim Amarim, so the Sotah waters stopped working. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai hifsik. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai stopped them. Shnei Amar, Lo efkod abonosechem ki tizinena, va'kalosechem ki tinafena kihem. Mishmeis Yosi ben Yoezer, Ish Sreda, right? Vyosi ben Yehuda Ish Yushalayim. When people like Yosi ben Yoezer and Yosi ben Yehuda died, Batlu ha-Eshkolos. The Eshkolos no longer existed. I will say, who are the Eshkolos and what are the Eshkolos? We'll discuss them in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Shneimar, Ein Eshkol le'echol b'chora osi nafshi. Yochanan Kohen Gadol, have your hadayas meiser. Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Rabbi say ultimately again stopped vidui meiser. So I'll say vidui meiser is the process in years number 3 and 7 of going ahead and saying bi'arti hakodesh min habayis. I have removed all of the sanctified items from the home. So Yossi ben Yoezer stopped this practice. We'll discuss why. Afhu bitas ha'ma'orin v'es ha'nokvin. He also stopped the ma'orin and the nokvin. What those terms are, we'll have to see. Amud Beis. Ad Yamav Hayupat Shmaki Yerushalayim, until his days, ultimately again the hammer used to clank in Yerushalayim. Again, we're going to discuss and what all these things mean. Obiyamav Intak L'Shala Demai. And in his days, he didn't have to ask if Demai was tithed or not, for he instituted that whenever you bought produce from an Amaretz, you had to tithe it. So I will say, obviously, the theme of this Mishnah is that at certain major turning points in history, so society unfortunately experienced a dramatic decline. And as a result of that decline, certain things were stopped. Let's analyze. So I will say, how do we know that if the calf was decapitated, and then afterwards they found the murderer, that he's still put on trial? In other words, that the decapitated calf does not exempt him. Because we'll say the pasuk explicitly says that the land is not atoned, right? The bloodshed is not atoned, unless, of course, again, the murderer is put to death. So I'll say, remember again, one witness saw or one witness claimed that he saw the murderer. So time with the machishle. So we'll say the reason why we don't believe the one witness in the Mishnah is why? Because there's another one witness who was what? Contradicting him. So it's one against one. So the Gemara says, Halo machishle eid echad behemin. Now we'll say what it sounds like from the Mishnah is, if you just had one eid echad, right? And that one eid echad says, I saw the guy who killed the deceased, that we would believe him. So we'll say, now by the way, believe him what? Believe him for what purposes? Not believe him to execute anyone, but believe him to do what? To do what? To essentially not do egla rufa. So say, how do we know that even an eid echad is believed ultimately again to shut down the process of egla arufa? So the Tanra Abanon lo noda mihiko. Because we'll say the pasuk says by egla rufa, we do not know who killed the individual. What do you see? What can you infer from here? Hanoda miko afilu echa b'safa olam lahayu arfin. If we would know who killed the individual, we would not do egla arufa. So we'll say it's incredible. Now again, obviously you're not going to execute someone based on the testimony of eid echad, but an eid echad could absolutely prevent the process from egla arufa from moving forward. How do you know that if the Sanhedrin saw, let's say you have a situation where the Sanhedrin saw one person kill another person, but they don't know the identity of the murderer. In other words, they saw the person, they saw, right, A murder B, but they don't know the identity of A. Still, they would not do egla rufa. Talmud lomar ve'einenu lo ra'u, because they say that what? Our eyes did not see. V'halo ra'u. But in this case, they did see. Hashta da'amrit eid echad mehemen. So I say, now that we say that eid echad is believed to ultimately again shut down the egla rufa process. So the Gemara says, Idi chad heichi machishle. So we'll say, once an eid echad is believed, so we'll say, so that means once an eid echad is believed, or let me say it differently, wherever you believe in eid echad, he is vested with the power of what? Two eidim. So we'll say, if that's the case that we are going to believe in eid echad, then what? How could a second eid echad actually contradict him? After all, v'ha'amra'ula, komakum shemina Torah eid echad, wherever the Torah goes ahead and believes one witness, Hare kan shnayim, he has the effectiveness of two witnesses, vein dvarav shel echad b'makom shnayim, and ultimately again the words of one have no impact in the face of two. So in other words, we'll say it's actually very interesting. So essentially the way we're looking at it like this: if you believe in eid echad, then what? When the eid echad shows up and says, I saw Reuven kill Shimon, so we'll say, so then that eid echad is believed like what? Two witnesses. If that's the case, when another eid shows up and says, no, you didn't see that, whatever, you were with me, we shouldn't believe the second one, because the first one already has the credibility of two. To which the Gemara says, Amar lecha ula, tani lo hayu arfen. Enachinam, you're right. And therefore, again, change the Mishnah to say that if an eid echad testifies that I saw who killed this guy, we would not do egla rufa. V'china Rabbi Yitzchak, tani lo hayu arfen. Rabbi Chia Amar, no, tani hayu arfen. No, they would do the calf. Or Rabbi Chia kasha duula. I'm sorry, Rabbi Chia kasha duula kasha. Kam b'basachos, kam b'zeh achar zeh. I will say maybe again the case is like this. When you have an eid echad that shows up, we believe him like two witnesses, and therefore, if another eid echad goes in and shows up later on, we don't accept the testimony of the second eid echad. But if they show up simultaneously, then what? Then ultimately, again, they will go ahead and cancel each other out. Tanan, if an eid echad said, I saw the guy who murdered, and two witnesses say you did not see it, hayu arfin, they would go ahead and indeed do the egla rufa. Ultimately, again, I will say, but if it was one against one, they wouldn't do the arifa. Tiyufta d'Rabchia. Ultimately, again, I will say this refused to position Rabbi Chia. So we have to stop over here for today. I will say, so again, we're picking a pickup in the eid echad. Again, much more beautiful. We're fine. We'll catch up. So we'll stop here for today. Again, incredible. We'll say, I just want to give you the disclaimer once again. We're not doing these sugyas justice. There's so much more depth and so much more profundity. We'll pick up a Meretz Hashem with the sugya v'erecha tomorrow. Say shkoyach. Amen.